the pronunciation is.
That's correct.
And he's the regional director of Dezan, Shira and Associates, and he will be talking about the changing face of Chinese society. So this is a plus and welcome.
Thanks, Jose. This is a presentation that I've given at a couple of conferences, HSBC conferences in China and the USA. And basically it's more about, and there's a reason for this, it's really talking about the changing nature of the Chinese market, the Chinese consumer society, in particular as it affects foreign companies coming in. What we're seeing in our practice here is a lot more people taking advantage of the changes going on in China, to take advantage of the Chinese consumer market. So this is really looking at basically where are those markets, who are the consumers, what are the trends going on in this sort of thing. So, and again, as always we talk about in this lecture series, it's all about questions and answers. So any issues you want to raise along the way that are particular to your business or your plans, please feel free to ask questions. It's very much interactive presentation. It's not just a series of graphs or charts about China, but what it does try and show is that China's on the cusp of changing. And what's happened in the last 5-year plan is that the government here has basically announced that we're moving from an export-driven society, low-value exports, to a consumer-driven society. And really the domestic consumption is now the growth model of China. And basically it's open for foreigners now to get involved in that domestic consumption society, as we'll look at the moment. I just also want to say that as part of this program we're running with the Ecuadorian Commercial Office, we're also open to a lot of questions. The participants have the right to, and please come and talk to us about any questions you have, any business plans you have. So feel free to either get in contact with me or Mary or any of the other presenters about these issues, okay? Look, you know who we are, so we don't need to talk about who we are anymore. So, okay. Let's just quickly look at what's going on in China right now, okay? And this is really just an economic snapshot. We won't talk too much about GDP. We know it's the second largest economy in the world now. Recently passed Japan, and it's heading towards the USA. So the prediction is by 2020, 2017, 2020, the Chinese economy will surpass the USA. It's the largest economy in the world. Sometimes that doesn't really mean that. It sounds quite impressive, but actually doesn't mean that much. I mean, and if you look down the bottom there of the GDP per capita, you'll see 6,000 US. That's the GDP per capita. That's per person. So 6,000 US per person. Anyone have any idea what the US GDP per capita is? 48,000. Okay. So US 48,000, China 6,000. So yes, the economy as a whole will pass USA, but the per capita spending amount is still very low. So there's a long way to go. Yes, please.
Sorry, this per capita is just per month or per year?
Per year, yeah. Okay. The amount of spending power per year. Okay. Yeah. And we'll look a bit more at what this figure means. And when you look at, particularly when you look at middle class, the Chinese middle class, which is everyone talks about now, the attractive middle class, what that figure means actually, and you'd be quite surprised. But 48,000 per capita. You look at a place like Australia, my country, it's about 38,000. I mean, US is quite the way ahead. I mean, there's countries like Switzerland, some of the Middle East states with the oil, they're much higher, but it's a developed economy. So China's, yes, will become bigger, but it's still got a long way to go. And part of this expansion going on is trying to bring that figure up. If you looked at a chart of how per capita has gone over the last 10 years, you'd see it going like that. Whereas the US chart would be very, very stable. Okay? GDP growth, 7.6. We all know there's been spectacular growth over the last 20 years. It's now tapering off and going down. This is the latest prediction for last year. We're thinking that this year it's about the same, 7.4% growth was last quarter in China. The thing is, again, when you compare it to what the growth going on in the West, this is huge. I mean, the US for the moment, last quarter growth was 1.1%, whereas China's last quarter growth was 7.4%. Australia, again, which is the the fastest growing Western economy was 2.2, and the prediction for next year is 2.4. So even though these figures are very much down from the 11-12% we've been seeing in the past, they're still very high. And people are assuming that the GDP growth in China for at least the next 5 years, will be between 6 to 8%, probably at the higher end. Okay? So the growth is here, it's sustained. And despite what you might read in the Western press, you see a lot of things in the Western financial press saying China's growth is finished, it's all finished, the miracle is over. Nothing could be further from the truth when you get down to the real figures, and we'll look at that a bit more in a moment. One of the big problems in China is ease of doing business. And this is one of these charts they have, which countries are the easiest to do business in. Consistently, the number 1 and number 2 are Hong Kong, Singapore, always. China has been going down. Last year was 89th, now it's 91. And really what we're seeing here, this is an ease of doing business basically for foreign companies I'm talking about. Foreign companies doing business in China. The reasons for this are many. There's bureaucracy, obviously, capital restrictions, bringing money into the country, getting money out, protectionism, Chinese government protecting its own industry, which is a very strong area, particularly in the monopoly areas like the SOEs are doing, communications, transport, things like this. We expect this to stay the same and not get much better, quite frankly. Although the new government here is promoting reform, and we hope to see a lot of reform going on. As far as Western companies go doing business, it's going to remain about the same. Okay? In fact, if you look at the chambers of commerce, American Chamber of Commerce, European Chamber of Commerce, Australian Chamber of Commerce, maybe even your own commercial office, when they do surveys of their members operating here, they've been asking questions like, what are the conditions like? Is China getting harder to do business? Yes. Is it getting more anti-competitive against foreign companies? Yes. Is it more protectionist? Yes. However, at the same time, are you making money in China? Yes. Are you making profit? Will you make profit in the next 5 years? Yes. Are you expanding your businesses? Do you see China as the most important consumer market? Yes, yes, yes. So despite these hard conditions of doing business, people are still making money here and investing for the future. And that's and really one of the major reasons is because of the growth in the consumer market. And you see all the multinationals pouring billions and billions and billions of dollars into new plants here, new production lines, all this sort of thing. So that's the big change in the society. Sorry, you were saying?
No.
Okay, sorry.
You answered already.
Okay, right. And this is a gradual process. It's going to take a long time, but we're seeing signs of this already. One would hope that this ease of doing business will get better, but don't count on it. And we've just seen recently with the GSK, the Glaxo pharmaceutical problems, bribery problems are going on, that it appears to be directed towards foreign pharmaceutical firms. Glaxo, Baxter, Sanofi, Evento, you know. However, people that know about the pharmaceutical industry in China know that everyone, Chinese and foreign, are involved in the same practices. So why they've just, and this is one of the issues, why have they just picked out the foreigners? Foreigners are easy targets and so forth. They've got big, deep pockets too, and they've got no guangxi, maybe. So it's getting hard, it's still hard, but people are still doing it. I mean, we're seeing at the moment record levels of investment from our clients coming in. We're seeing new American investment, European investment, Latin American investment into China. So people want to be in this market. Exports, well, China's economic miracle is based upon exports, and that figure is still rising. Okay? Still rising, despite what you hear in the paper. Not only are exports rising, but imports are rising at the same time. So behind the bad, gloomy financial press, things are still getting better, quite frankly. Inflation, a couple of years ago, for those of you who may have been here, you remember inflation was out of control. We had inflation of over 6%, 7%. That was the government's figure. The real figure was higher. Well, and what the government's been doing is trying to keep that figure down, and it's done it very successfully. Last year it was under 2%. This year we're looking at 2.4%. And again, part of the government's reform is to make sure that inflation's down. Fifth-year plan, again, as I said, basically you're realigning the Chinese economy from an export-driven economy to an internal domestic consumption economy. Very fundamental change in the way that the government's operating. The government here realises that they cannot sustain the kind of growth levels and expansion levels on the back of exports alone, particularly when the Western world is in basic no-growth situation. So we have no growth in Europe, very little growth in the USA, so the Chinese economy can't expand on an export-driven model to no-growth economies. So it has to realign itself, and that's what's going on right at the moment. Again, just behind the headlines, if you read Financial Times, you read Wall Street Journal, you'll think that China had stopped as a productive market. But if you just look at these things, I mean, retail sales, the latest figures up 13%. So Chinese retail figures are every month you see it going up. Industrial production always up, exports up, imports up. So, you know, this is going to be sustained. The reason why the financial press sit there saying, oh, it's terrible, or there's a real problem in China, is because these figures are not as high as they thought. So instead of having retail sale growth of 15%, it only came in at 13%. And if it comes in under, the Western press go crazy and go, oh, it's a disaster. Well, that doesn't look like a disaster to me. You know? Yep.
What the production China have, actually, the ones officially everybody know.
Yeah.
This is what we're talking about.
Yep.
But there are like 50 business go on the normal line, like 100 business they are on the line.
Sure.
If we put this all together, it means it's going to be amazing things for it.
Well, no one knows. That's the problem. I mean, and the question sort of, people always say, oh, you can't trust Chinese figures. You can't trust the government figures. Even the government doesn't know what the real figures are. Look, it almost misses the point, I think. I mean, there's a, as you know, even in Latin America or Europe, the black economy there, I mean, in some parts of Europe, the black economy can account up to 30% of the whole economy. Spain, basically. How do we trust the figures coming out of Europe? I mean, these are the only figures we have to work with. So therefore, I don't think anyone really has tried. I mean, certain people do try and get underneath the figures. But I mean, it almost misses the point to me. I mean, when you look at, if you want to dig down into economic figures, the tax receipts issue is, because there's so much black economy here, we don't really know what the tax situation is. I think it misses the point though. And really the only way you can deal with China on an economic basis is really top line stuff. Trends. Never, economists basically talk about statistics all the time. Look at these figures. But they actually don't really tell you that much. When you look at statistics for a country like China, which is actually a continent rather than a country, you've got to look at trends. And the trend, if you look at a trend, and here's a trend, that's a trend over 20 years or 15 years. And the trend, no matter what happens in each quarter, is up. If you extrapolate that for another 10 years to 2020, the trend keeps going up like that. If you go backwards another 20 years, 25 years, you'll see that same. And that may be the only way to try and understand China in economic terms, is this sort of long-term trend stuff. Maybe. I don't know. I just want to, this is a great HSBC map, okay, to put China as a country in perspective. And a lot of Europeans, a lot of Americans, particularly Americans, because they don't really understand anywhere apart from the USA, don't actually get how big this place is. I mean, and if you just look at this, I mean, Shanghai has got a GDP of Indonesia. Indonesia, the most populous Muslim nation in the world, 220 million people. Shanghai with 24 million people is the same GDP. Okay? And you go through all these extraordinary things. What have we got there? That's Shandong, Canada. Shandong is as big as Canada. I mean, you know, and this is where people actually miss the point of China. They see China as a country. It's actually not. It's a continent full of 20, 30 different countries. And the idea of trying to treat China as one market or even one people is really misguided. I And this is why a lot of big foreign companies have actually hit the rocks in China by trying to do a whole China strategy, or take their strategy that's worked in Europe or the USA and apply it across the country.
Where's Ecuador?
Zhejiang, look at that. Zhejiang is as big as Australia. Australia is one of the richest, fastest growing, most productive countries in the world. Australia, and Zhejiang is of the same GDP. Now, if you look at this, that's estimated for 2020, which is only, 5 years away or something. Even if you go back to the current day, there's similar type things, but it really puts it in perspective what is going on here. And you know, even these so-called poor places, there's Sichuan, and then we have Switzerland. Now Switzerland, when you imagine Switzerland, you imagine it's very rich, very country. Sichuan, admittedly, Sichuan is the most populous province in China, or is it Henan? Sichuan, one of the two. But it's got an economy, GDP, as big as Switzerland. And these things are only getting bigger. We'll see in a moment what's going on in a lot of these, particularly these so-called, inner Western or poorer provinces. What kind of GDP rates are going on there? And of course, the story at the moment is that all the economic activity has been along here, the East Coast. This is where the growth has been. Now, the idea that this has slowed down. So Guangdong, which is the powerhouse in China, has now only got a GDP rate of about 6%. And that is seen as being slowing down. But still, it will have an economy as big as Spain going on. When you move inward, you'll see the GDP is going up and up and up, and we'll have a look at that. Right, let's go on to who are the consumers. You've all got your idea of what's going on in China, and again, we're trying not to generalise here, because when you start generalising about China, you make terrible mistakes. But we're looking at who are the Chinese consumers. Generally, they're middle class, and we'll talk about what that means, because we all have different ideas of what middle class means. Relatively young, urban, and we'll talk about what that means, because urban has a very different idea in China. Modern, but not Western. And again, one of the biggest mistakes Western companies make in China is trying to think that people, consumers here, want to be Western. And that couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, they want to be modern, but certainly they like certain Western things, but they don't want to be Western at all. White collar, again, that's a very strange term here. It's linked very much to an urban thing. Price conscious, internet savvy. We all know the explosion of the internet in China, the online market, and we'll have a look at that in a moment. This is actually probably one of the more interesting charts going on. 20 years ago, the average age of a worker in China was 21 years old. 15 to 20 years ago, 21. So only in a space of a generation, we're now at 37. So and one of the problems here, and if you're interested, if you compare it to India, and India is like the only comparable country to China as far as going, the average age of worker there is 22. So what's happened to China 15 years ago, basically with this very young undeveloped country with a very young workforce, and if you pump in a lot of dollars into it, you get this sort of GDP growth. And that's what's going to be happening in India. India's got a huge population, very young workforce, undeveloped economy. And you start pumping money to that, it's going to go on the same GDP curve. The problem though, and this is exacerbated by a number of issues. The problem though is very quickly you get to a very old workforce. So we have 37 here. The average age of a worker in USA or the Western Europe is about 38, 37 or so. What this causes no workers. And this is exacerbated by also one-child policy, but also by the nature of the economy. We're actually running out of workers here, which is quite extraordinary when you think about a country of 1.3 billion people, that you're running out of workers. But if you're actually in business, you actually see it yourself. And one of the biggest complaints Western and Chinese companies have operating out is HR. So there's a big HR crisis going on, and this is one of the reasons. But as you can see, as the Asian worker gets older, the average disposable income goes up. So we've got more money. So there's more, but less people earning it, and there's going to be less people down there. So the people now have a lot of disposable income, but they've only got a very short working life, and there's no people coming on behind them. There's another problem here also, and that is because the Chinese government doesn't provide a social security net. There's going to be a lot of older people with very few younger people making money to support the other older people. So we've got a little bit of a crisis going on. Japan's going through it right now. They're happy out, but this is about 20 years away here. So there's a little bit of a crisis going on. But just to show that the wages have been going up exponentially, we'll have a look at a bit more about wage growth. Challenges, rising labour costs, probably the biggest issue certainly over the last few years. We've been seeing HR costs doubling every second year over the last 5 years. So doubling every second year. They've slowed down a bit now, but the expectation is it'll probably double again, the basic wages here, in the next 5 years. That's exponential HR growth. Probably the biggest issue facing foreign companies in China is HR, from a number of reasons. Rising, and the main one is costs, okay? Talent crunch, as I said before, there simply isn't enough workers going to go around. So as companies get bigger, they want more talented workers, and there just simply aren't places around. This forces up the price, and it causes a lot of problems, okay? Again, labour costs and talent crunch are probably the biggest issues. Now the government has got inflation under control, which was the biggest issue. Inflation causes raw materials, production costs to go up. Now that's under control. The HR is the biggest issue. Rising production costs. A couple of years ago, the operational expenses was the biggest problem. Now it's been sort of stopped a bit, but still, raw material costs have gone up here, commodity costs have gone up, rent's going up, all sorts of things. So a lot of the margins are being squeezed. This is why the export model doesn't really work anymore. And we can talk about what's going on there. Inflation's stable now, but if inflation gets out of control again, well, we don't know what's going to happen. Aging workforce, I mentioned. Again, this goes into talent crunch there. Protectionism. This is one of the major problems for foreigners. As the economy hots up, as it gets more competitive, then it's going to be more protection again for Chinese companies. This now, and you're probably finding it, is the most competitive market in the world by a mile. There's nothing quite like it. A lot of Western companies we get across our doors, and you see a lot of failures. They think they're stars in their own market. They'd be brilliant in Europe. They're exporting. They come here and they can't believe how desperately competitive it is here. And it's going to get worse. Everyone wants a slice of this pie. Everyone. And, you know, the Chinese are, quite frankly, better at it. They're better at this than we are. We, when I say we, foreigners are. Foreigners don't really get that. They don't really get that the Chinese are better than them at selling in their own market, at producing in their own market. And it takes a lot of arrogance for foreign companies to come here and think they can do it better. And you see some extraordinary high-profile failures here. Just, you know, billions of dollars being lost by arrogant foreign companies, multinationals, some of the best companies in the world, coming here trying to impose their business plan, their marketing on a country, on a civilization that doesn't really get it. So this is and it's taken a long time for a lot of foreign companies to readjust their approach. Increased competition, again, urbanisation. Urbanisation is probably one of the more interesting aspects. Currently, we've just passed what's called the tipping point of 50% urban, 50% peasant, let's say, farmers. And for the first time in China's history, it's gone above 50. So it's more people are living in cities now than they are in the countryside. And this is going to continue. And we'll take a look at this. By 2020, it's going to be 60%, 40%, and keep going. So this is good, because urban people need, get paid more. There's more infrastructure, there's more jobs, there's more things, they have more money in their pocket, they spend more, so the consumer spend goes up, GDP rises. But of course, what you're doing is you're changing the balance. I mean, arable land for farming goes down. Where does China get its food from? You know, who owns the land? So all these kind of disputes over land ownership become important. Pollution, of course, is a big issue. The more people you have in cities, the more polluted things get, things like that. So it's a big issue. At what cost do we urbanise? People talk a lot about the middle class here, the rise of the middle class and so forth. It's generally thought that between 30 to 50,000 per annum, which is about only 5,000 US, to 8,000 US or so. Again, remembering back to our chart, per capita is only about 6,000. So it doesn't really, the idea of middle class, and again, Latin America has a different idea, the US has a different idea, Europe has a different idea. Yeah. What this is about is disposable income. So the numbers don't really make that matter, whether it be 50 to 100, it's about how much disposable income and how much are you spending. And basically, what happens once you're making 30,000, 40,000, you have money left over. And you buy it on stuff. Stuff you wouldn't have, not necessities, not basic things. You buy phones, you buy cars, you buy refrigerators, you buy Prada handbags, or whatever. Fake Prada handbags, I don't know, like that. You buy things. And finally you get to that point where you can actually spend money, have a nice meal, buy a gift and things like that. And this is just this basic. So, look where we are. We're in 2012. What percentage is that there? Under 10, or just on 10%. 10% of the population is classified as middle class, which is nothing. And the growth from 10 years before that has not been that quick. So we're at maybe a couple of percent in 2001. 10 years later, we're only at 11% or 12. But here's the engine going up. In the next 10, 20 years, we're looking at a quarter of the population. Now, I'm no numbers man. I'm just a lawyer. I can't do the exponential growth or the percentage growth. But I can see that straight away. That's an exponential growth in disposable income to be spent by Chinese consumers. That's 25% of the population. Yeah.
Actually, in the tourist market, we can see that's very clear. Because normally, the people who were starting to travel approximately 10 years ago was like maybe 5%. I mean, overseas, not just around the corner in China. But at the moment, the market to the overseas just go far away. I mean, we talk about Europe, United States, or now Latin America. It's getting very high. And I'm asking you before per capita per year because I was doing the research in the tourism area. And like you said before, all China is a continent, and we have to see each city like a country. I just took the highest level and per capita in all China. I find it in the tourism branch in Shanghai. People win a lot of money and even give us, but give more money to travel than money to buy or shopping things.
Sure.
I mean, first is travel and then go shopping.
Okay.
And the two most things are just spending money. Still spend. But it's amazing.
Maybe it's travel and shopping.
Yes, that's why I first. And that's the point. In the last just 10 years, because it's a book about statistics in the tourism area, not general, just in tourism. Just in 10 years, it reached about 20%.
Right.
It's amazing. And I can imagine what will happen in the next 5 years.
Can you imagine what's going to happen in the next 5 years?
And just, I can see now at this level. Actually, this is...
I think you'd probably actually do a whole talk on tourism.
Yeah.
And how where that's going to go. I mean, I don't know. You're more an expert in this area than me, but you just see what's happening exponentially. I mean,
it's getting very high.
Yeah. I mean, the anecdotal evidence coming in from Europe, or when I travel to the States or Europe or back to Australia, you see it's in front of you. And that can only get bigger and bigger and bigger. So this is happening in front of us. Again, it's just another. And here we're looking at different cities, and this is getting back to this regional approach rather than China as a whole. So if you don't believe the Greater China figures, let's look at the city figures. And this is interesting. We've got Shanghai, Greater Shanghai. Where's that? The blue one. So we already have a very, very high percentage. Where are we? 2012, over 50% of Shanghai is middle class. Now, I don't know whether that's exactly right, but look around you. I mean, it's only 30,000 per annum, which is not that much. So, the benchmark, quite frankly, is not that high. So that I can believe that figure. But you have another 10 years, and you're 70%. And this is there's money here in that sense. I mean, but you also look at these other things, and towns we've never really heard of. I mean, we have because we live here. But quite frankly, people overseas never heard of Shenyang or Changsha. And these are these extraordinary what we call second-tier cities, second and third-tier cities, which we'll talk about in a moment. I mean, quite frankly, these are the more exciting places for growth than the big cities, the big first tiers like Shanghai, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, Shanghai, Beijing, who are pretty stagnant in their growth. I mean, and you look at the rates. Look where we are now with places like Changsha or Chongqing, way down. And we're talking about, again, this extraordinary exponential growth that's going to go on in this middle class, in these second-tier cities, these forgotten cities in many ways. And this is probably where the most exciting thing is going on, which we'll have a look at. Right. Where are they? I mean, it's clear that the major consumer markets are where we think they are. We think they're in Shanghai, Greater Shanghai. And when you look at Greater Shanghai, you're talking about Shanghai, Ningbo, Hangzhou, Suzhou, Wuxi. In that 1 hour district, 2 hour district, there's 58, 60, 70 million people. Same with Beijing, Tianjin. That corridor is a city cluster of about 50 to 80 million people. Again, down south, Greater Guangzhou and Shenzhen, I mean, they're almost connected. And Hong Kong, again, is almost connected there. But then you start looking inland, and this is where the interesting stuff starts happening. I mean, Chongqing, Chengdu, of course, everyone's talking about the extraordinary growth going on in Sichuan, particularly in Chongqing. Chongqing is a more Chinese growth story. Chengdu is a more Western growth story. Western companies are tending to go to Chengdu. Chinese companies are tending to go to Chongqing. Both are expanding enormously. Extraordinary stuff going on there, particularly in Chengdu, like that. A lot of it's to do with this sort of gateway to the West issue. A lot of it's to do with dealing with the South. But also, you other things. Xi'an's growing. Zhangzhou is probably one of the fastest growing places in Henan. It's now become a hub. So it's a transport, logistics, infrastructure hub. It's again probably a place no one's ever heard of in many ways. Wuhan is another place, again another logistics and transport hub. All growing extraordinary. Look at some figures on what's going on there. Shenyang at the top there, again, is and probably a bit further on there's Dalian. Dalian, one of the big success stories of China. Used to be a dirty rust town, a port. And it was revitalised by a very charismatic mayor who will go nameless because he's been involved in a trial at the moment. But he revitalised the city as an IT hub and a university town. So he started all these universities there and turned it into an IT thing. And now, now it's bigger than Bangalore. Bangalore, which used to be the IT hub of the world, is now moved to Dalian and also to Chengdu. Chengdu is now a big IT hub in the world. So all the major IT companies in the world have either invested in Dalian or they've invested in Chengdu. You don't see that kind of investment going on anymore in Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou. Too expensive. Too expensive, far too expensive. What we're seeing we don't deal at the top end, we deal at the middle market and SMEs. So people are jumping over the first tier cities and going to these second tier cities. They're going to Wuhan, they're going to Chengdu, they're going to Shenyang, or even closer around Shanghai, Hangzhou, Wuxi, so Ningbo is moving also, like that. Again, let's just put some perspective in here. Again, this is on this sort of what people don't get about China. China's got over 160 cities with a population of over 1 million. Okay. Europe has 35, the US is under 10. I mean, admittedly, the US is very decentralised, but still, it's only got under 10. In 10 years' time, China will have over 220 cities of over 1 million people. Now, you start putting, and here we have all our fancy European cities down here don't even come close to these places. Milan, Zurich, again, here we have Switzerland again. Switzerland was as big as Sichuan, that's right, but Zurich's down here. So you see all these little towns, and there's a great slide next about a bunch of towns you've never heard of, and they're equivalent towns in Europe and USA. Is that next? Oh, we didn't put it in, sorry, okay. I didn't put it in. But what we have is these 6 Sichuan towns who are equivalent in size to US and Europe, capitals, and they're just towns you've never heard. They're not even third-tier cities. They're 4th, 5th, 6th-tier cities. And they've got populations. Populations, remember, with middle class rising. And the thing about these places is that there is no competition in these places. They've never seen products. They've got disposable income. And they want to spend it on stuff. But there's nothing there. And what a lot of bigger Western companies now are doing is they're moving away from first-tier cities, moving into 2nd, 3rd, 4th-tier cities. And you'll notice if you go to places like Zhangzhou or Changsha, you'll see a Walmart there. You'll see a Prada store. You'll see, of course you'll see KFCs. I mean, they'd be way ahead of their game there. So they're exploring these because that's where the growth is. And here we go. That's just an idea of some of those 2nd and 3rd-tier cities and some of the growth going on. Tianjin, one of the fastest growing places in China. It's the port of Beijing, for those you don't know, just right there. So it's Beijing's port. It's almost a country in it by itself. It's one of the big major cities. So Shanghai, Beijing, Shenzhen, and Chongqing all have city status. They're all municipal provinces on their own. Tianjin's the next one. Okay, so it's almost like a country on its own. And we're seeing growth rates of 14% there. Now remember back to what China's growth rate was. China's growth rate is 7.5%, but it's almost double in some of these other places. And what you're seeing is that, yes, growth is slowing down around here because it's such a high base. But out here, it's going up, or it's high. You might get a growth rate in, let's say, Guangdong of 5%. But because there's a growth rate here of 12, it averages across to 7.5. But what this means is that when you see a growth rate of China going from 7.6 to 7.4, it doesn't mean that much. It means nothing, in fact. What it means, you've actually got to start looking at what's going on really on the ground. And if you start looking at Chongqing, 14%, you're seeing a different story altogether. This is the story that's not really told by Western commentators, Western press. They're so busy looking at the big picture, they actually don't see what's going on the ground. And from a position like mine, when I've been working with foreign companies doing business in China for 10 years, all I see is good stuff coming through. I mean, you see problems in the big picture, but on a ground level, day to day, you just, and even when I look at my employees, we've got 120 staff, Chinese staff here. We see how they're reacting to their lives. I have friends, Chinese friends. I see, we see what our local Chinese companies are doing. We see growth. We see stuff reflected like this. So as you can tell, I'm very bullish. I'm very positive about the future here, at least in the short term. Particularly when I see things like this. What a lot of foreign companies are doing is they're actually trying to regionalise their approach here, rather than start a big office in Shanghai, which is going to be so expensive. Let's think of a different approach. And we'll look at some stuff on second-tier cities. The problem, of course, is it's scary out here. For a new foreigner, Shanghai, very lovely, very safe, it's very foreign. You start moving inland, and it gets a bit scary for people. It's China. It's China out there. And that scares a lot of people. They can't sit in their bubble, their little expat bubble. But a lot of people are doing it. They're actually going out there, and you sort of hear these great stories going about. So, I've been living in Wuhan for the last 5 years doing my business. And I'm going, really? You've been living in Wuhan for 5 years? But that's what's got to happen. People have got to start looking at new markets where there's opportunity, so much opportunity. You get your business plan right, you get your marketing right, you get your market, pick your market. There's a lot of opportunity there. I think tourism is a brilliant. If you can get out there somewhere, yeah.
Actually, this top city, Tianjin, Chongqing, and Lanzhou is in our future market because we get a lot of feedback from the tourist fairs.
Sure.
Then we see where a lot of people want to start things because people have money now and they want to just go travel and say, you want to go to Thailand, Indonesia? No. Just in North Korea, they want just far away.
Yeah.
So
much
I can pay the flight tickets. It's getting much stronger. And I just go to a ladies from Tianjin. They want a complete, very good luxus class tour for the clients they have. They say, oh, okay, no problem. And this is great.
Yeah.
Some of the things. Like you say, it's amazing. The most of people want just
not just tourism, but you could actually look over a lot of different sectors.
Yeah.
We'll look a little about some of the sectors and really do the same issue, do the same thing. Tourism is very high profile. We see them there, but I think you could look at a lot of different sectors. Food and beverage. I mean, a lot of people are opening up little restaurants now. There's a lot of people exploring trying to get their products distributed, which is a tough one. We could spend a whole hour talking about how to get products distributed in China, which is another issue altogether. It's all very well for us to sit here saying there's a great market out in Xi'an, but how do you get your stuff to Xi'an? How do you get it on the shelf there? How do you find that's another issue altogether. Okay? Don't think so myopically, so single-mindedly on where things are. I mean, yes, Shanghai is a very attractive market, but the disadvantages on Shanghai compared to some other places are very, there's a lot of disadvantages here. A lot of this cost alone. Cost. Competitive. It's so competitive here, To try and get a toe, get in here is a very difficult thing. We still see lots and lots of foreign customers trying to come to Shanghai. But it's a tough market. It's a really tough market. Beijing's tough. Gosh, the South's tough. Hong Kong's tough. I just want to look at go on with the second and third tier city thing, and we deal particularly. We have offices in Hangzhou, Suzhou, and Ningbo, which are just around Shanghai. So we see a lot of this. We have clients in places like Yiwu and Wuxi and Changzhou, Changshu. So we see a lot of what's going on, and quite frankly, we see more growth going on in those cities than we do in Shanghai, in that sense. Clearly the top advantage is growth potential. These places are growing quicker and faster than traditional markets like Shanghai. There's also, and again, this is a little bit of a, you'll notice I've got the next one, influx of new talent, but on the disadvantage, I've got talent crunch. And on the one hand I say this, on the opposite I say the opposite. It's a bit unsure as to what's going on, but there seems to be a trend of a lot of people to move back to second and third tier, to their hometown. They've done years in Shanghai, or they may have gone overseas. They've come back to Shanghai, Beijing, they've done the big city, they've done some experience, now they're moving back. And the reasons for that basically, we can't generalise here, but one of the reasons is housing. It's very difficult for people to buy a house in Shanghai. The prices here are just, I can't afford a house in Shanghai. Can anyone? No one can afford a house in Shanghai. When I say a house, I mean a real, not way out in the suburbs. So people tend to, maybe they get married, maybe they rent here and they go back home and buy a house. Although I noticed, I was in Changshu last week, and the prices there of an apartment are huge also. So there is a thing about going backwards. Some of the, but then again, I mean, one of the big problems with some of the second and third tier cities is you can't get good staff. You can't get good bilingual staff. You can't get educated staff, because those people that are educated bilingual tend to move to the cities, the big cities, or tend to move overseas. So we've got a little bit of an issue going on. Cheaper production costs. I think that yes, it's clearly cheaper as you move outside of the big cities, particularly from an HR point of view. Land costs, and in many of the if you're doing things like manufacturing facilities, you can't do them in Shanghai anymore. You've got to do them outside of the city. So where there's cheaper costs. Improved infrastructure. I mean, it's getting easier to get to these places. I mean, there's no doubt. We see the great infrastructure with highways, with railways and so forth like that. It's much easier to move around, get to these places. I mean, and that's going to get better and better. China, of course, has announced a huge expansion of its rail and transport networks. So a lot of these out-of-the-way places, second-tier cities, are going to become open and available. One of the biggest problems with foreign companies, or Chinese companies also, if you've moved your factory from, let's say, Shanghai to a second-tier city, let's say Hefei in Anhui or Changsha, to take advantage of lower production costs, lower HR costs, you lost those by getting the product back to the port. So you put your factory out in Anhui, but to get the product back to the port to send it to the USA, you actually wiped out any profit, any changes. That's getting better. So logistics is getting better, infrastructure is getting a lot better. So it makes much more sense. Unmet demand, again, we talked about there's not so competitive out there. So there's not so many competitors, whether they be Chinese or foreign. So there's, people have got money and they want to spend. So there's demand. Well, what's happening now, of course, is people come to the big cities to spend. But of course, if they could do it in their own town, they would. Special economic zones, there are virtually no economic zones or incentives to go to Shanghai now, virtually none, unless you're a big multinational. If you're a Microsoft or you want to spend $500 million here, then you'll get it. If you're a small player, you won't get anything. They're not offering anything. Outside of Shanghai, around in the second-tier cities, offer incentives. Not great ones. Basically, it's just the local government will hand back money to you based upon a reduction of tax or reduced rent, but it can be the difference between getting something going and making some profit than not otherwise. So it's always got to be looked at. The other good thing is that the zones battle each other. They want your investment in their area because they've got targets to make. And if they make their target, then they get bonuses and they can move up the hierarchy. So they'll battle each other. So you can play cities off against each other. You can actually play zones within a city off against each other. So you might have, let's say Kunshan, they've got a number of zones around them and they will actually bid for your investment in those cities, so you can actually do a deal. And that can only happen in second, third, fourth tier cities. Stable workforce, relatively stable, I should say, compared to, say, Shanghai. So you've probably got to have less problems with turnover, getting people in a place like that. More relaxed policy environment. Again, the second tier and third tier cities want to do business. They're trying to build their cities up, they're trying to build up investment, so they tend to be a little bit more relaxed than, let's say, a big city like Shanghai. Shanghai doesn't need your investment. Shanghai actually sometimes just doesn't encourage smaller investment because it doesn't really rock with their time. They're looking at the bigger picture. Other towns, smaller towns around Shanghai, are very they're a bit more relaxed. I've talked to a lot more. I've got the Shanghai Invest guys here, so but I think we find it a bit more relaxed in other places. The disadvantages, again,